Thank you very much, Ingrid, and thank Joe for the opportunity to be here today. He's working very hard today on doing a split shift, which I should, as regards Ingrid's point at the end, I should stress that if I express any views today, they're certainly not those of the Low Pay Commission. I'm speaking entirely on my own responsibility. Just looking at Shakespeare has something to say about inequality. This is from King Lear. The rising inequality is a worldwide issue, and what I want to do today, I think the situation in Ireland may be slightly different. So what I want to do today is report the facts and set some context. What I'm going to specifically or mainly talk about income inequality, it's important just to note the position in relation to wealth. Total household wealth in Ireland is north of 700 billion. Housing is about 400 billion. And now we don't have good information on the distribution of wealth here, and that's a gap, and particularly the distribution of the great wealth that there is in pension rights. For example, public pension rights are worth 98 billion. What we can say is that almost 60% of the wealth is owned by people who are over 55, and the under 35s have about 4%, so it's very much related to the age you are. Over the last 20 years, earnings inequality in Ireland, and when I saw this data, it surprised me. The ratio of the top to the bottom decile, in other words, the top 10% of earners versus the bottom 10% of earners. In 1994, that ratio was about 5. In 2013, it's under 4. So wage inequality has declined over the last 20 years. Just want to introduce a concept which may be familiar to some. One of the ways we measure inequality across the world is by something called the Gini coefficient. Now, we needn't get into the technicalities, but if a Gini coefficient of 1 shows absolute inequality, one person has all the income and nobody else has any income. If everybody has the same income, the Gini coefficient is 0. So what you've got to remember is the higher the number, the more unequal. Okay. Just looking at the situation, and this is the most important one, the distribution of income after people pay taxes and after they get transfers, mainly social welfare. And this is at a point in time, it's a particular year. If you took a lifetime approach, these numbers would be lower because sometimes there are transfers across the life cycle. For example, during my working life I pay PRSI. When I'm retired I don't pay PRSI and I get a state pension. So that's the thing. So these are point in time measures. So what we see is that Ireland has a Gini coefficient of 30.30, which is about slightly less than the OECD average, in the middle of the pack, 15 of 32 countries. If you look at before the state gets involved, before taxes and transfers, and this is also surprising, is that Ireland has the most unequal distribution of income in the OECD, much more so than the United States. But as I say, the most important one is the previous one, after taxes and transfers. Now, why is this? And it's a bit of a puzzle. We have and I think there are 3 certainly contributory factors. We have a very large number of jobless households in this country, and I'll say more about that later. We have been extremely successful in attracting mainly US multinationals to this country. And what that means is, first of all, these people in these, about 9% of employees, a much bigger proportion than in other countries, and they earn on average about twice what everybody else earns. So that's that makes the income distribution more unequal. And we heard a bit about it last night, we have a large agricultural sector, and some of it has particularly low income. Now, the tax and transfer system in Ireland achieves the greatest reduction in inequality, both absolutely and proportionately. If you look at all the OECD countries, the countries that come nearest to us in the degree of redistribution they have from market income to disposable income is Finland and Belgium. Okay. All right, let me just take you through briefly a couple of concepts that I want to talk about. People who are at risk of poverty are those who earn less than 60% of the median income. That is, the median income is 50% of people are above it and 50% of people are below it. So it's the middle point, right? Okay. So they've less than 60% of the median income. People who are deprived are people who cannot afford 2 or more items from a list of 11. And the list includes they can't keep their home warm enough, or they can't replace worn-out furniture. And consistent poverty are those who are both at risk of poverty, have 60% of the median income or less, and are deprived. So those are the 3 things I want to talk about. Now, these are figures for the at risk of poverty rate before taxes and transfers. And you see Ireland here is nearly half people are at risk of poverty in Ireland before the state gets involved. All the numbers are high. Even Denmark is high, 40%, but Ireland is 50%. We're the second worst of 28 countries after Greece. If you look at the situation after the state gets involved, after taxes and transfers, the risk of poverty rate in Ireland comes down to 14%, and we are the 7th lowest in the OECD. So we have a big improvement between the pre and post situation. And we're a bit better than the OECD average. Okay. This is the reduction in the risk of poverty by the tax and transfer system. In other words, 36% of people who would be at risk of poverty if the state didn't get involved are taken out of it when the state does get involved. And Ireland is the best of 28 countries. So we have a very effective tax and transfer system at dealing with this issue. Now let me talk. I want to look here in particular the one on the right-hand side, consistent poverty. That is people who are both deprived and at risk of poverty. And what's interesting here, it seems to me, is that children are 5 times more likely to be in consistent poverty than the old. We are 8% of people in the state are in consistent poverty. It's only 2% if they're over 65, but it's 11.2% for children, not to 17. So we seem to be doing very well in terms of looking after older people, but doing less well when it comes to looking after children. If you look at it another way, who are the people in consistent poverty? People who are at work and retired, very low levels of consistent poverty, just 2%, 2.4%. People who are unemployed do worst. 1 in 5, nearly 1 in 4 are in consistent poverty. Okay. What I want to talk about now is the importance of work. What this chart shows is that households who have a lot of work, very high work, their risk of poverty is 2%, and households that have very little or no work, half them are at risk of poverty. So the less work you have, the greater your possibility of being in poverty. And this shows how much it is. Households with the least work are 27 times more likely to be at risk of poverty than those with most work. What I want to talk about now are jobless households. This is a particularly serious problem in Ireland. The people who in jobless households are those in households where the people between 18 and 59 work less than 20% of their available time. So they do some work, but not very much. Okay? What it shows is that the proportion of the people in Ireland in jobless households is the highest in the EU by a distance. In other words, over 1 in 5 people in Ireland in those age groups have little or no work, compared to an EU average of we're over almost twice the EU average. What are their characteristics? 20% are lone parents, 62% have upper secondary education or below, and 20% are in receipt of disability benefit. Okay. And this is a persistent problem, is that even if we go back to when we had full employment in 2007, the unemployment rate was 4.7%, less than 5%. And yet at that time, 1 in 7 people were in jobless households. Okay. Some people say to me, but Donal, you've talked about the tax and transfer system, but that's all right. But you know, the total tax system, when you account for indirect taxes, is very unfair. And that claim is made on the basis of this chart, which shows that in the bottom 10% of the population, the tax rate is 28%. Okay? And I want to talk in particular about the special characteristics of that bottom 10% of the population, which makes that number, I think, questionable, or maybe you wouldn't want to put too much store in it, I think. Just looking at indirect taxes, excises, of course, are regressive. Excises are, taxes on tobacco, alcohol, petrol. And what the most unfair tax in the Irish fiscal system is the tax on tobacco, because people in the bottom 10% of the population spend absolutely more on tobacco, absolutely more than people in the top decile. So if you're totally driven by distributional considerations, you would reduce the tax on cigarettes to zero. Alcohol is also regressive, but judging by what was going on in the bar last night, it's a bit less so than it was. But in terms of public policy, it seems to be, and I think it's the right decision, health considerations get a priority over distributional ones. Okay, on VAT, VAT is regressive in relation to income, but it's proportional in relation to expenditure. But what we do in this country, we actually take particular steps to mitigate the effect on poor people, unusually so, in that we're the only country other than Malta and the UK which exempts food from VAT. For example, the Danes, a highly progressive country, if you were in Denmark, you pay 25% VAT on your food. Okay. Now, this is the chart that I think first flagged my concern about reading too much into the bottom decile. This shows the expenditure as a percent of gross income by decile. Okay? On average, people spend roughly 80% of their gross income. But the bottom decile spends 180, almost twice their gross income. They spend 186% of their reported gross income. That's what the surveys tell you. Okay? Of that bottom decile, 40% don't have medical cards, and the reported income is below basic social welfare plus child benefit. So there's something strange going on in that bottom decile. Is there underreporting of income? Is it people like self-employed people making temporary losses? Is it students who are not available for work? It's not necessarily the highest deprivation rates are not in that group. They're further up the system. Okay. And coming to the end, okay, that's all very well, Donal, but what would you do about it, right? What's the best, most effective way of trying to tackle inequality? It seems to me there are two things we should at least think about. We need to invest in education, particularly targeted at the disadvantaged. I think all the evidence shows that investing in early education, or preschool education in particular, pays the highest dividends. And that would be a good thing. The other thing I think we have to take very seriously here is that extraordinarily high number of jobless households. And one of the issues that seems to be a problem here is the very high cost of childcare. The cost of childcare in Ireland is the highest in the OECD, and I think it stops in particular lone parents with possibly relatively low education just cannot get a job which would pay them and enable them to cover the childcare costs. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.